You are live.
Good afternoon, and welcome back to the virtual connected tech event. For the next hour, we're going to be talking about smart buildings and smart workplaces. Worlds are colliding. I'm Dave Karpuk from Planon Corporation. I'm the Vice President of Operations for Planon, which is a technology company that provides solutions for integrated management of real estate and facilities. I've got with me on the panel today, Jeff Castleman. Jeff has spent more than 31 years in the commercial real estate transaction, advisory, and consulting business. He's completed more than 1,000 transactions across the globe, worth more than $1 billion. Current and past customers include Caterpillar, the National Association of Realtors, Petco, Marriott, and UPS, among many, many others. Next, I've got Joe Gaspardoni. Joe is the COO of Montgomery Technologies. Intelligent Riser, a division of Montgomery Technologies, has been installing enterprise-class networks dedicated to building systems since 2010. Joe has managed the triple-digit growth of Intelligent Riser installations since 2016. Over his 30-year career, Joe has leveraged operational experience in CRE technology, finance, syndication, management, and ownership to drive innovation. And finally, Darlene Pope, who most of you probably know by now. She's been, I think, in every session of this event. She is the organizer of the event, and I'm happy to say she is my new boss. She is as of March 22nd, the president of Planon North America, and we're thrilled to have her on board and are really enjoying her knowledge of the smart building and smart workplace environment. So thank you to the panelists, and why don't we just go ahead and get started. I want to ask the first question to Darlene, because I know that she is the one who gave the name to this session. And the title comes from an episode of Seinfeld, in which George Costanza panicked because two spheres of his life that he was trying to keep disconnected, his friends and his romantic life, began to overlap. So Darlene, in your mind, what's the significance of that thought, the collision of disconnected worlds, to this topic?
Yeah, thanks. And I love this topic. I think I've been describing this worlds colliding for the past like 5 or 6 years, as we've seen kind of the traditional smart building world coming into the workplace and the traditional digital workplace or smart workplace world coming into smart building. So we're seeing these two worlds colliding, right? So one thing I just want to correct in the opening, I just want to say I'm not the organizer of the event. There's a lot of people on the back end running this, and it's not me. However, I am the chairman of the event, so I get exactly. So I get to help bring in great panelists and moderators and come up with creative titles for sessions such as this one. So let's go back to worlds colliding. So what we're seeing is smart buildings colliding with digital workplace and digital workplace colliding with smart buildings. And people don't know what to do with this, right? So in the same way that George Costanza was like, oh, can't handle this, worlds are colliding. That's what's happening in the industry today, because we have building engineers that are saying, wait a minute, you can't give control to the tenants to control their own HVAC. That's my job. You can't cross over those two worlds, right? We can't have mobile apps that do room booking and temperature control and lighting control, because we're crossing over that traditional, what the building owner is responsible for versus what the tenants and the enterprises are responsible for. even things like occupancy detection, when we're trying to figure out utilization and use of space and de-densification, the worlds are colliding because the building owner needs that data and the enterprise needs that data. And there are multiple stakeholders within those two worlds that also need that data. So I think what we're being faced with, and why I love this topic so much, is because I've always looked at smart buildings as that end-to-end technology strategy where the two worlds have already collided and come together seamlessly. So that's why I'm looking forward to this conversation, to take kind of the traditional, two worlds and let's collide. Let's see what we can do with it.
That's where exciting things happen. Joe, would you like to add anything to Darlene's
Sure.
introduction of the topic there?
Yes, well, much like the Seinfeld show, things get a little messy when the worlds collide, and we're seeing that start to play out. We're really at the nation stage of this. You have, we talk a lot about silos and siloed operations in buildings and building operations, and one of the things that you're seeing now for the first time is leases are getting done in a silo with no new component to review. And then it turns out, 6 months later, when the tenant's starting to get ready to move in and the TIs are being done, all of a sudden somebody reads a page or two of the lease where it says, hey, this big tenant that just took 6 floors actually has rights to control the BAS on those floors, and sometimes to get the data from that. And that throws everybody for a loop because nobody saw that in the silo of lease execution. So then all of a sudden the building is stuck holding the bag saying, how do we get this done? How does it happen? And so those gray areas that are created from this collision are now staring at us as they start to happen, and then coming up with whose responsibility is it when the equipment breaks? Who gets to control what? So that's the granular side of what's happening when these worlds collide and solving for that. And we're just really just starting to solve it.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Jeff, anything to add to what your colleagues or your cohorts here have said?
Well, they've teed it up really nicely. But if you think this is collision, just wait 5 or 10 years when all of these disruptive technologies converge and all become mainstream everyday type technologies, where we can't remember a day when there wasn't automation, or there wasn't IoT, or there wasn't robotics, or there wasn't AI, right? All those things, 3D printing, I could go on, and they all converge all at the same time. And that kind of overlap is where we're headed faster than most people think. So this is sort of just the warm-up act to that.
Okay, thank you. For those of you who are in the audience taking all of this in, I think that first question gave you a little bit of insight into the depth of knowledge that our panelists have today. If you have questions, please submit them through the Purple World platform, and I will make sure to prioritize your questions over the ones that I've prepared to get started with. But for right now, I want to move on to a question that is kind of personal to me. I'm an old school architect, trained in the era of dumb buildings, and I have I've been working in the field of facility management and facility management technology software for about 30 years now. But I do have that more traditional view. And so when I started looking at the Internet of Things and smart building capabilities, I tend to see individual technological innovations. Occupancy sensors and IT connected building equipment, and lighting and temperature controls that respond to the occupants and their preferences as discrete developments that affect single systems or single functions. But it can still sometimes be hard for me to put together a broader vision of the smart building world, of just what you referred to, Jeff, as a future when we won't remember a world where this wasn't all automated. So, given that, Jeff, I think I'll start with you. Can you help us to grasp that bigger vision, the grander implications of all of this?
I don't know if I'll do it justice, but I will certainly try.
Well, that's okay. I'm going to ask your peers the same question. So.
Good. I, for one, so you read my, my bio highlights at the beginning. I've been around 31 years or more. And I cannot remember a time when we conducted business without the internet. I really can't remember a time we conducted business without cell phones. And yet a good chunk of my career was during that time, right?
Yeah.
I remember going on my honeymoon and coming back, and we moved offices during that time, and this weird thing called email was set up at the new office, and we're like, okay, well, what are we supposed to do with that? Like, what do you even do with that? Like, can you even remember a time without email? It's hard to remember, and that's the kind of transition, right, that we're really talking about. Technology is growing exponentially. It's mathematically factual. It's not because I said so, right? And the proof is beyond a shadow of a doubt. And as a consequence of that, computing power is growing exponentially, and prices are being cut in half approximately every 18 to 24 months. That's Moore's law, right? And as a consequence of all that, we now have enough power in the cell phones in our hands, right? It's 100 times what the Apollo missions had to go to the moon and land on the moon and come back with, right? And in 10 years, it will be 1,000 times what we have now. So try to imagine a time when everybody has real-time data, insights into every single thing there is to have data insights about. You have a marketplace now that's probably less based on negotiation and more based on emotion and desire. Either you want to or you don't want to. You know what the data says. Sort of like Moneyball for baseball, right? If you know the Moneyball story, and it was the introduction of data science to baseball statistics, and yet there was a whole bunch of managers, old school managers, who still felt like gut instinct would manage better than data. And in the end, data has proven now over several seasons to actually be the better way to go. There's still some holdouts, right? We're still in that slow moving transition. But imagine 10 years from now when we all have that kind of data at our fingertips. Every building becomes a just walk in technology. You know, the Amazon Go retail stores, right? Quite an experience. You walk in, you take whatever you want, you walk out. You don't really pay on the spot. You do pay through your app ultimately, but they call that just walk out technology, right? That's what they refer to that as. I'm going to give you the inverse of that. It's just walk in technology. When you walk into the building knows you. They know you're there. They know what you like. And there's instantaneous adjustment to your environment at that building because your presence has been detected, right? It's just walk in technology as opposed to just walk out technology. At the end of the day, it comes down to three things, just to sum it up, in my opinion. Customer, right? What does the client want? They can go anywhere. Computing power is ubiquitous. You can work anywhere you want. So why do you go where you go to do your work? Because I don't have to go anywhere. So what does the client want, and what gets them to leave their house and go to their office or to their workplace and their workers, for that matter? Number two is experience. If it isn't experiential, if it isn't engaging, if it doesn't have what I call DICE. DICE is something that I coined a while ago pertaining to retail space, but it really applies to everything, which is differentiation, inspiration, community, and experience. And if it doesn't have a lot of all four of those elements, it's probably going to fail, whatever it is, right? A business, a restaurant, a place that you might go to. If it doesn't engage you on all those levels, That's the second thing. The third, of course, is the capital partner. Who's making money on the proposition? Okay. There is one thing that needs to be said about smart buildings, which may not change despite everything I just said. And that is, a smart building is one that's fully leased, and it never really needs to be any smarter than that. And that will still be true in 10 years. I think how you get to fully leased, though, is entirely dependent on the kinds of things we're talking about today and the kinds of commentary I've just given you. But maybe not. If you can lease up a building to 100% and your capital partners are making money and your tenants are happy, right? I don't know that you need all that technology. I just have I'm hard pressed to believe you could get there without it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, I remember a cartoon a few years ago where someone said, what if you were told that you had all the knowledge of the history of the world in your pocket, and the only thing people used it for was to share pictures of cats and start arguments with strangers. But I think you guys are showing us that there are better uses for that. Joe, would you like to add to what Jeff has said?
Yeah, I would answer that by taking a step back, because I think it's important when we look forward to also understand where we are. And I would sort of look at it like this. If you go outside the commercial real estate industry, actually even a step behind that is in any stack of any industry, you kind of have in order to build the next generation solution, you have three underpinnings sitting underneath. You've got what we call the network infrastructure layer, which is, if you can think of it as just as the network. How do we get connectivity and data going where we need it to go? That conduit, if you will, for data. And then on top of that, and that's kind of the foundational level. And then on top of that, you kind of have this data infrastructure layer or common platform, if you will, where data goes and is a repository. A lot of people think of it as the cloud and a data lake or cloud database. Oftentimes it's more disaggregated than that, but it's the data and being stored. And then you have the applications that are interacting with that data. So you have these three layers sitting underneath. And in most industries, the first layer, the network infrastructure layer, has been solved for quite some time. And in the second layer, the sort of data or common platform layer, that has very often been solved for some time. And then the third layer is what everybody's working on top, which is the fancy, sexy solutions that come off of what you've built as a foundation. And so to take it back to commercial real estate, the challenge, because I think if we get there in 10 years, that's a huge win. Like Jeff's 10-year timeline, that is a win for the industry. But in order to get there, the struggle or the challenge is we have not solved for any of those yet. Where other industries can play on top, we're really solving for all three at once. And so I would just say that I think much like a building being built, you have to start with the foundation, and then you have to start building floor by floor on top of that foundation. And so we're really trying to solve for all three. So that's a little bit of a heavier lift than your typical situation, your typical use case. So the future is bright if, and it's a big if, you're building that technology stack in order and appropriately so that you can actually achieve those things on top. And that achieving that layer on top is directly contingent upon the right stack underneath, the right foundational elements. So I would throw that in, that yes, the future can be bright, but let's make sure we know where we are. Yep.
Great. So Darlene, I want to give you an opportunity to speak to this as well. But if I can, I'd like to add, a little step to the side to that as well. In terms of experience of users of buildings, is there a line or a threshold that we cross where we're conscious that we're moving from a set of discrete technologies into kind of a true smart connected environment, how does the end user, experience that? Is there a point at which they will say, oh yeah, we're not in Kansas anymore? Not that there's anything wrong with Kansas.
So I think to the end user, quite frankly, the experience needs to be more seamless. And what's going on behind the scenes is not visible to the end user. So what I think has changed in the last, I'd say 5 to 10 years, is the ability to integrate multiple platforms together. So back to your prior comment about the fact that, traditional architect, blah, 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 most companies purchase solutions in silos. And they purchase a room booking platform, and they purchase a work order management platform, and they purchase a visitor management platform, and they purchase an access control and a lighting and an HVAC, and they're all purchased individually because based on prior history, a lot of these solutions were proprietary and closed protocol. And so when you look at the evolution of the smart building world, and we started to look at open protocol and the ability to start to integrate access control and elevator dispatch and HVAC and lighting, all of a sudden this world started to get really complicated because we're integrating, right? And then guess what's happening on the software side of the house? We've got APIs and SDKs, and guess what? Instead of buying all of these platforms individually, they're integratable, they're open protocol, they have the ability to share data with other platforms. So now you're looking at a situation where you don't just have a whole bunch of disparate systems and disparate data sets. You have the ability, as Joe mentioned, to put in place that core platform and then to build your technology strategy around that platform so that you can bring all your data into the same place and have that single source of truth. So I think what's happened is the technology has given us the ability to integrate and be much, much, much more complex. The result to the end user is seamless experience, higher experience, but they have no idea why they have the benefit of that level of experience. And again, taking it one step back, I always compare this to a puzzle, right? And there are a whole bunch of different pieces to your smart building, smart workplace puzzle. There may be 30, 40, 50 pieces. And they include things like, room booking, visitor management, mobile app, temperature control, lighting control, all of those different pieces that we used to treat as individual silos and individual solutions. And so if you look at all of those as puzzle pieces that go together, right? And so you have to make sure as you are selecting a solution that it is a puzzle piece that actually fits into your puzzle. And so then you get the total picture and you can understand the entire landscape of all these different pieces that fit together seamlessly. So if you take a puzzle from a piece from somebody else's puzzle that doesn't fit, it doesn't do you any good. And also on that note, what's the first thing you do when you build a puzzle? You look for all the edge pieces, right?
Yep.
Together, so you have a foundation that was easy to put together. So you have that foundation, and then you start putting the more complicated pieces in as the puzzle starts to come together in one single picture. And that's how I look at this combination of smart buildings, digital workplace, blah, blah, blah. And to create that seamless experience to the end user, all those pieces have to come together seamlessly.
Okay. So we're talking about some kind of a platform, which I assume could take many, many shapes, but that provides that kind of glue that allows all these things to build and to interact with each other in, as you describe it, this seamless experience. Any further thoughts about that platform and that connective glue from any of you?
I would probably throw in that when we're talking about putting the pieces of the puzzle together, what we're really talking about is building intelligence either in the smart workplace side of the equation or on the building operational technology side. Those are those two pieces formulating as the puzzle pieces get filled in. And today, when you think of building intelligence, a simple definition of that is when you get two disparate systems talking together to perform a higher level function and to Darlene's point, in a seamless fashion. In other words, the user doesn't think about it, it just happens. And so an example or two of that would be, you have an access control system in a building. And today you put your badge, wave your badge, you get access, you go to the elevator and you go to your floor. But when you're smart, in the smartness there would be destination dispatch, which is the access control system talking to the elevator. And when you wave your badge, the elevator says, I know he's going to the 13th, 14th floor, and I'm going to run an algorithm on our elevators to get him the elevator that's going to take him to the 14th floor in the fastest, most efficient manner. So as a user, I just find that, wow, the elevators really work well here.
Yeah.
But it's great. And that's as far as it goes. But really, that's building intelligence, the start point of building intelligence. And another example of that would be something like on the smart workplace side, if I am able to use my phone in my office and control to some degree the temperature, the comfort level of that office, I've got the user in the office, the tenant, talking to the BAS system. So I have these two disparate, what would be siloed normally, the phone and the BAS system, talking to each other to achieve something higher, a higher level of function. And that would be, in this case, the comfort level of the office. So those kinds of things, indoor air quality is a big one. You've got, an indoor air sensor, that indoor air quality system talking to the BAS system so that when the indoor air quality becomes unhealthy, the fresh air from the outside gets upped and you bring that level of healthy air up into the building. So those would be examples of ways that intelligence has started in a building. So do you have a smart building? I don't know. When you say a 2-year-old is smart, what are you saying? It's relative to other 2-year-olds. So I guess you could say today, if you had 2 or 3 of those functional, you probably can technically say it's a smart building because most buildings don't have it yet. So
See, that's exactly the point, right? In 5 or 10 years, they're all going to be smart buildings,
totally different.
but they're going to be normalized to where your expectation as a business or as an employee of a business occupying that space, you expect it and it's normal, right? And you can move across the street or across town and still expect it and probably get it, right? And so it's really, in my mind, I agree with what you were saying earlier about the infrastructure. I was just sort of jumping past it to talk about, the funner stuff on that top layer. But I drew a picture as you explained it because I think it's a great explanation of it, right? It created a very good visual for me, so I appreciate that. But everybody's going to have that, and it's going to be normal, and that really is the point, right? And so now, what do you do with it, and where do you go, and why do you go there? And that's totally up for discussion and debate because you don't have to go there. You want to go there. So what makes you want to go there? That's a really big question all by itself.
And I think that's the other piece of that is so important is there's the beginnings of a potential split in the market between the people who are moving that direction and let's call it the laggard component. And to fast forward 5 years, if that continues, you really are going to have competition drive the need because I, as a tenant, will go across the street to get the things I don't have, or I'll stay where I am because I have them. And so that competition via vacancy rate is really, could end up being one of the main drivers or motivators to get a lot of the laggards to invest in both smart workspaces and smart buildings.
Yeah, I agree with that. Although I would even sort of repackage it like this: in that 5 to 10 year time frame, I believe the majority of the commercial space available to us as consumers of space will be in the form of space as a service. So if it's space as a service, and I can come and go as I please by the hour, the day, the week, the month, the year, I really can be portable. I can pick up and go across the street tomorrow just for a change of pace and come back again on Wednesday or whatever the case is. And that makes it really hard for the underwriters of this technology, right? To deploy it and determine what its scalability is, what its ROI is. How do I invest this money and get my money back if all I know is Jeff's going to bring his company there for one day and that's all?
Yeah. Well, Jeff, you mentioned earlier, why would building owners do this? And buildings aren't smart now. We're leasing our buildings 100%, and as long as it's 100% leased, I'm fine. Except when the building across the street all of a sudden is smart, and except when all of a sudden the expectation of the tenants is for features that we didn't used to have before. And so let's go back to the 90s. I remember I used to sell high-speed internet access to building owners back in the 90s. And I remember meeting with an owner in Atlanta, Georgia that said, Darlene, what do my tenants want to use the internet for anyway, right? And that was the attitude about the internet in the mid-1990s until all of a sudden, everybody needed internet access, everybody needed email, and it became such a high demand that the building owners had no choice but to put it in because the guy across the street had it and the guy across the street had it.
That's really what I think Joe's saying. Yeah.
So now, if you look at the way that people live outside the building, we live on our mobile devices. We do everything on our apps, right? Whether it's GPS to get from one point to another, whether it's banking, trading, communicating, everything is in the palm of our hands. And then we walk into a building and poof, all that goes away. You can't find a conference room. You can't find an exit. You can't put, whereas if I go outside the building, I can find anything I want. Anytime I want, I can check into my flight. I can do everything. So the expectation of the end user is that why can't I do that in my office? Why can't I check into a room by walking into it? Why can't I blue dot wayfind all the way to the conference room that I've just spent 10 minutes for trying to find? And so while I understand that in the real estate world, if you have a 100% leased building, that's great. But the expectation of the tenants and the users in that building are, I want more. I want to be able to navigate in my office with my cell phone the same way that I do in my home and the same way that I do outside the building. So I think the expectations of the tenants are changing, which is going to drive the expectation of the building owners.
I think one of the interesting things about that is that, in the last 15 years, the introduction of innovations has kind of flipped. It used to be businesses had new stuff and exciting technology before consumers did. But, maybe beginning with the iPhone era, it seems like all the innovations come to the consumer and to the home, and the office, the commercial real estate world tends to be the laggard.
Yeah, we've always had a problem there. When Darlene was selling high-speed internet in the 90s, I was building an enterprise property management application for commercial real estate. And so back then you had, it's hard to even imagine, but in the late 90s, the majority of the market was still using DOS software to do their property management. I mean, it was that far behind. And so we've had a legacy perception problem in commercial real estate with technology as a cost and it's solely a cost with unprovable metrics around efficiencies and cost savings. And so that has always been seen, and a lot of it had to do with old thinking. Some of the old original founders of some of the biggest REITs just saw they didn't see why you couldn't just do it on a ledger and by hand. Like the ledger didn't make mistakes. You could see it, you could hold it. It was that kind of mentality that really kept a lot of innovation from occurring. And then we really didn't help ourselves when the dot-com bust happened, because a lot of the new technology at that time blew up. And so that kind of set us back a little bit. But I think this time around, the reason to be optimistic is that far more capital is going into this market for next generation solutions that is not dependent upon a short-term return. And that's a critical thing in commercial real estate. You have to recognize that your time horizon is 10 years. It's not 3 years. You cannot approach this market the way you do when you're selling software in another market. You have to approach this with the long game and the long view. And so one of the things that we're seeing now is the millions going in are not expecting a 3-year uptake in this market. They're really looking at the 8 to 10 year horizon, and that's the smart horizon. So I think we're going to see a lot of things actually get to critical mass, a lot of different technologies and solutions that we haven't seen in the past because smarter money is coming in to fund it.
I would modify what you said only slightly with that money that's coming in and the decision makers that are coming with it are digitally entitled and
true.
enabled, and that's a demographic shift
Yes.
more than anything else. So I saw something on the internet today. I don't know if anybody follows Visual Capitalist. That's a company, a software company that takes, hard data and puts it into a visual orientation, which makes it much easier to soak in and enjoy, at least in my opinion. So check it out if you get a chance. Today, they talked about what percentage of baby boomers are decision makers in America. Okay. Turns out it's over 75% baby boomers. Okay. That's sort of the last of the analog generation. They don't assign the same value to technology and to digitization trends in investment choices and in ROI dynamics as Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z. You could keep going on and on and on. And as those different generations start to move up the corporate ladder and take on decision-making positions with nothing but digital know-how from the day they were born to the day they go somewhere else. That's all they know. This will accelerate mightily. But right now, the majority of the money, the majority of the decision-making is being held by the last of the great analog generation. Myself, I'm part of that generation, so I'm knocking myself in a certain way. It's no disrespect intended, but it is the definition of digital divide. And that's really what you were describing. To me, it's a matter of demographics and a little bit more time, right? We just have to get more digital decision makers through the system.
And what you described,
policymakers.
Yes, correct. And that's almost what I was going to say. That extends into the organizations themselves, where the leasing brokers, the underwriters, syndicators, everybody becomes digitally savvy and expects certain things. And you're right. When that phases out, sorry, old people, but there's an element to that. I mean, I'm old. This is my 30th year in commercial real estate, so I don't qualify as young. But as that phases out demographically, I do agree. I think that's going to bring with it.
When I speak, I use a slide that pretty much sums it up. There are 4 curves on the same slide. There's technological change, and as you can imagine, very steep curve. Okay. Then there's social change coming behind it. Then there's business change, a little bit of a softer curve, and then there's political change, right? And it's almost flat, right? And that's
there's
the
real
reality.
estate change underneath that one.
Then there's real estate change.
That's not even on the chart. It's down. You have to blow it up.
I think that's like geological change, right?
So.
Listen, all we've ever known is linear, right? And all of a sudden we're faced with exponential, and we use linear data and linear know-how to try to do the best we can to make decisions for exponential, but it's a mismatch, and it's growing. That mismatch is growing by the day for that very reason.
Yeah, we see that. That's true.
Okay, if we could focus for a minute on a very closely related topic. Jeff, in one of his earliest comments in this session, talked about the fact that 5 to 10 years from now, we may not remember the world that didn't have all of this smart connected experience available to us. But as we get there, this rapid adoption of technologies and integrated environments, what do you guys see as the biggest challenges in supporting this fast-paced move? What do we need to be cognizant of in terms of potential conflicts and difficulties in sustaining innovation? Where do people need to see flashing warning signs, if anywhere?
Well, we covered. Go ahead, Darlene, please. You go.
No, I was going to say it does kind of go back to, we've got sort of what I would consider a more traditional um, uh, industry that is being hit with technology at a pace that is 1,000 times faster than the industry. And whether that's architects, engineers, developers, building owners and managers, right? Technology, I don't think anybody's going to argue technology is moving 1,000 times faster than the industry. But I think if you want to look at what's going to happen down the road and what we need to be prepared for the future, is look at the way that our kids and these millennials work. Look at how they live, look at how they work. Everything's digital. Everything's digital and everything's app driven, quite frankly. You look at the way that our homes, we operate in our homes. My home is fully digitized. And I come into my home and I tell Alexa, Alexa, turn on the lights, Alexa, play country music. And if she starts playing it, I'm talking too loud. But we come into our homes, my kids, I describe it, my kids don't use a light switch, right? My grandchildren won't know what a light switch is because when they walk into the rooms, they say, Alexa, turn on the lights. They say, Alexa, turn on the fan. Alexa, close the garage door. That's the way we live. So then you walk into the office, and again, I go back to this disparate, worlds colliding, right? Let's talk about the worlds are colliding, the way we live outside the office, and then you walk into the office, and you have none of that. So if I'm sitting here in my home office, I can pick up my phone and adjust my temperature. If I go into my work office, I can't do that. I have to pick up the phone, call a receptionist. The receptionist will write up a work order ticket. The work order ticket will get dispatched to an engineer. The engineer will then come and adjust my temperature. As opposed to being able to pick up my phone and say, I'm too hot and I'm done. And it automatically communicates with a damper over my head and instantaneously increases airflow. And it has cooled my space and I am happy and I'm content. So I think in terms of what's missing, but what's missing is maybe just that vision and realization of the real estate world that we can do this stuff today, right? We keep talking about the office of the future and the workplace of the future. And I'm like, every time people talk about that, I say, no, this is the office of today. This is technology that can enable us to work this way today. And that app I was describing several years ago back at JLL, we actually deployed that for a customer. And worker satisfaction went up 76% after deploying that app. So on the one hand, you may say, well, nobody's asking for this. Well, nobody asked for the iPhone in the first place. It's if you build it, they will come. So
Nobody asked for the internet.
Exactly. If you build it, they will come. So all of a sudden, if we are putting these types of tools in the hands of the end users and they go, oh my gosh, I didn't know we could do this in the first place. Employee satisfaction went up 76% by giving them a tool that they didn't even know was possible to deploy in the workplace. So I think we have to open our eyes, open our minds, have a bigger vision, and just go out there and think outside the box and do things we know we can do that maybe we haven't traditionally done within the workplace. And I think that's really going to break down these barriers. And then once one person does it, and they're like, well, wait a minute, at my office in London, I can control my temperature with my phone. How come I can't do that in my office in New York, right? So I think that's the demand is then going to, the response will follow the demand from there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I would say that two giant red flags, warning signs to go back to that idea are sitting there. One is because we're in hundreds of buildings every year doing assessments and technological assessments, we see very clearly that what I'll just put under the umbrella for now of the infrastructure segment layer is so it's not there. It would be the equivalent of having like 6 spines in your body, not really communicating, crisscrossing data. You wouldn't function as a human. So that's one that, I mean, we know 98% of the buildings in the market, probably more, but I'm going to keep it safe. They're not ready. And so preparing for that foundationally to be able to take the next step is one big red flashing warning sign that we see. And then the other side of that is this, what I would call the finger pointing problem, where you've got the building that says, yes, tenant, whatever you do in your space is fine. You go for it. You make it as fancy and as smart as you want. but that's your space and we're over here and we're going to or not going to accommodate that. And we see that a lot where an example I just heard today was a great data point where a company that's doing next generation indoor air quality rents half of the commercial office building that they're in, and they want to deploy their solution. And the landlord has said, no, you can't deploy it. And so
you're assuming that all buildings are multi-tenant commercial office buildings that are leased. Okay, what about the thousands and thousands of other buildings that are corporate facilities, that are hospitals, that are hotels, that are convention centers, that are other types of real estate that where you don't have that same conflict between the owner and the tenant. So I think we have to also look
Totally true. If you're talking about, you know, a Microsoft campus, a Facebook campus, a Google campus, any kind of non-transactional building where they're there, they are going to implement these solutions first and they're going to reap the benefits first. Hospitality is another great one that's going to go in faster. Hospitals is another great one that's going to jump in faster because they don't have that disincentive model sitting underneath the liability protection model, if you will, that sort of hampers us sometimes. So yeah, I think, and for any next gen solution provider that's listening, those are the markets to go to first because you will get traction. You don't want to start with commercial office buildings, for example. You really have to see the solutions elsewhere.
But they're also the tech leaders: Microsoft, Facebook, LinkedIn, Uber, Cisco, Google. I mean, they're the tech leaders that are the ones that should be putting all these in their buildings first, and they're doing that. So we should look at them as really holding them up as the model for the way that buildings could and can and should work, even in a commercial environment.
Yeah, they will be the ones that prove this out and allow people to take that next step behind them. They're going to basically create the wake that everybody goes behind because they will have metrics and data that will say X will happen when you do Y. And that is going to, I think that's going to be a big driver as we look down the road here.
You guys done a nice job of covering it. It's sort of the first mover advantage, second mover advantage, right? Going back to economics, right? And I think that's a real thing. We cover the digital divide. That's a real thing, right? In terms of who's making the decision, who controls the capital. But here's another element to it. And by the way, earlier, Darlene, you talked about the seamlessness of it, right? That shouldn't be left out of the discussion here because the right amount of training, in my opinion, is no training. It has to be intuitive enough to just start to use, right? And the reality is the only constant we have now is accelerating change, which means even if I get used to it for a day or a week or a month, it's going to change again. And so it has to be easy to relearn to use without a whole lot of training. So those are some of the big bottlenecks or big things to think about. But here's one more. I learned this when I was working at Newmark, right? When publicly traded company. And it's really about opportunity cost. We were constantly being pitched about software and new technology and scale and ROI. And we listened intently and we tried to make the best decisions we could on behalf of the global enterprise. But we only had so many dollars, right? And we were under pressure to return shareholder value in that instance, okay? And so the opportunity cost was, well, maybe we should use that same capital that we might have otherwise used for technology and use to buy a company. And all the accretive revenue and know-how and talent that might come with that acquisition. So it's not an infinite amount of capital that any landlord or any company has to invest in technology. The priorities are shifting. It is moving up the ladder. COVID has supercharged an attention span towards everything technology, which is a great thing for all of us on this call and hopefully a lot of our audience here today. But don't lose sight of that opportunity cost and that justification dynamic of ROI and scale, right? There's all these great startups and they provide amazing service in New York City. It does nothing for me in New York or LA. I can't do it, right? Doesn't match my scale. Won't match my scale. Wish I could, but sorry, I can't. There's all kinds of those dynamics being made in the C-suite that seem invisible to people, but are clearly impactful in what's happening and why it's happening. So that's the one thing I think I could contribute to on top of the stuff you guys have said.
Great point.
Okay, another related topic, and one that I think does go hand in hand with the concept of smart buildings is sustainability and the impact on the environment. And I see Jeff nodding his head. He was waiting to talk about this, so I think we can start with him. I would really like to hear all of you talk about the relationship between smart buildings, smart workplace technology, and the environmental missions that sustainability missions that many corporations, many businesses have adopted.
Well, it's simple in my mind. Our industry emits more carbon into the atmosphere than any other industry.
Yep.
By far. So there's a lot of pressure on our industry to do something about it. All of the technologies and infrastructure and data collection and overlay technologies that we've been talking about or alluding to or could be talking about are all directly applicable to energy management, in addition to all the other things that they can do. At the end of the day, you're going to see a lot of government mandates, local, county, state, national. So there's many already in place. You're going to see a lot of corporation ESG mandates as well. And again, in 5 or 10 years, the norm will be net zero, moving towards net positive, which today would be unthinkable or yesterday would be unthinkable. But you also have solar energy and renewable energy becoming much more cost effective and much more efficient. Almost everybody on the planet is moving to EVs, right? And away from petroleum based engines, right? Combustion engines. Mm-hmm. And so energy is very much at the center of everything, whether it's visible or invisible, whether it's prioritized today or not until tomorrow. It will move up the list of priorities as fast or faster than anything else that we can talk about. I like to say it's existential. If we don't do something about it, right? They all call this the pivotal decade. If the people in this decade don't turn this ship and the net temperature on the earth goes up 1.5 or 2 degrees as projected, or 2.5 degrees, there's no people left on the earth. It's existential. Right. And all of a sudden, cybersecurity doesn't seem as urgent anymore, right? Or just walk-in technology, which makes that elevator ride so seamless and so enjoyable, right? It's just not as important if I'm dead. So it's really as high a priority as we have to talk about, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of thoughts on this one. Two sayings. One is, the most energy efficient building is a vacant building, right? And the second one is buildings don't use energy, people do, right? So if you didn't have people in your building, you wouldn't have to have air conditioning, you wouldn't have to have lighting, you wouldn't have to have electricity in the first place. So while I understand the physical components of the building are the ones that are using the electricity, we're using it for the purpose of the people in the building, right? So if there were no people, we could turn our buildings off and they'd be really, really energy efficient. So let's take a look then in terms of how do we measure and manage the energy demand from the people in the building in the first place. How do we put technologies in that are more energy efficient that will maybe use less per square foot? But at the end of the day, you still have to deliver energy to the people in the building, whether it's because they have multiple laptops or whether it's because they're charging their cell phone or they need light or they need temperature. The other thing that we really haven't touched upon with this is even with COVID and indoor air quality, one of the things for indoor air quality is to open up the dampers and bring in a lot of outside air. But what is that going to do to your energy costs? Because now you got to condition all that outside air that now you're all of a sudden your priorities changed, right? So energy management wasn't as important as indoor air quality. And so I think there's always got to be a balance around your business drivers. And while the energy sustainability component of it is certainly a high business driver right now, We also see prior to COVID, businesses putting more and more people into less and less space, right? We used to design for 150 to 200 square feet per person. And back, some of these co-working companies are designing for 50 and 60 square feet per person, right? So what does that do to your energy costs? If you put more and more people into less and less space and you get better value for your space, your energy costs per square foot are going up. Your usage, your carbon footprint is going up as well because you're putting them all into the same building. So I think you really have to balance all of your business drivers. There's energy, there's space, and then there's people. And so if you want a very productive workforce, you need to be focused on indoor air quality, which uses energy. So I think you just have to balance all three of those so that you're not sacrificing one for the sake of the other. The other part about the energy management sustainability is if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And I think when you look at buildings and smart workplace colliding, we're now in a situation where there's so many companies that have to report energy consumption and carbon footprint and all of their ESG metrics. And they don't have the ability to do that because they're leasing space in a building where they pay a pro rata share based on their square footage. So now we see a lot of building owners having to put, energy meters in, sub-meters, or the tenants themselves attempting to get their own energy consumption metrics and indoor air quality metrics and things like that. So I think when you see the two worlds colliding, how do we use the smart building data and components to be able to provide the information to the smart workplace side so that the tenants can get the benefit of that data and change their behavior to contribute to energy management and energy and less energy usage in the building. If the tenants don't know how much they're using in the first place, how do we expect them to contribute to the energy management program and help reduce energy costs and carbon footprint in the building in general? So I think there's a lot of moving pieces there.
Totally. And that your people use energy is spot on because it's to a large degree, if you don't have any visibility into the energy you're using, we see it all the time. People leave the office and they don't turn the lights off, and they don't go off until the janitor comes through and switches the lights off. That disconnect there. I would go back to New York. For years, New York has had a sub-metering policy. If you're doing a TI in a building, you're going to have to put a sub-meter in. That's just part of the workflow in any commercial office in New York. Why we haven't implemented that very few other places, I don't know. In California, that doesn't apply. And so as a result, you don't have the infrastructure, that going back to that word, to have the visibility to make people accountable for how much energy they use, or just to let them see it so they can implement policies. And so when you're only paying a fraction of a CAM charge for your energy usage, there's no connection between your payment and that usage. And so that's a huge challenge to overcome that hopefully, I suspect legislatively we'll start here, because we're going to need the ability to report it. So you're going to have to start implementing it. I think that
even go back to like what we're seeing with COVID now. We're running buildings at 90% occupancy when they're vacant.
That's right.
They're vacant and we're still running them.
Because the CAM charges are there and there's no we're
not taking the data and using it in a smart manner to be able to contribute to reduced energy costs and reduced carbon footprint. And anyway.
So I think you can sort of look at that as probably a big chunk of potential sitting on the table. That might be some of that low-hanging fruit that is sitting there to be accomplished. But I'd point to another one too that probably people don't have as much visibility into. There are very few things that run 24/7 in a building. The BMS shuts down after hours. You can turn it on, but generally it's not a 24/7 running system. And the same is true with lighting and all those other systems. But some things do run 24/7. And one of those areas is the network infrastructure. The switches are running 24/7. The modems are running 24/7. Whatever's being passed through it is being consuming energy 24/7. So if you have 11 networks in your building, you're using 11x an order of magnitude more energy 24/7. And if you those areas are opportunities when you can centralize your infrastructure, centralize your network, make systems run as one as opposed to silos, you get the energy benefit, the savings of that, and that really adds up. I mean, a lot of these buildings you're talking about an 8x difference. So there are places like that that you can go in a building to gain those efficiencies. It's just that we're really at that, again, that nascent stage of finding them and solving for them.
Do you know what? If you
Okay,
gave
well-
tenants the ability to control their own HVAC, watch what that does to energy costs.
Oh, straight down, straight down.
yeah,
I know in our office, I can attest, I know that would happen. Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, we have reached the end of our time slot, and unbelievably, this has been one of the fastest and most enjoyable hours that I've spent in 2021 so far, and I even get to count it as work. So I want to thank all of you, Jeff, Joe, and Darlene, for all of the amazing insights you've given us this hour, and wish everyone a good night and a fun day tomorrow at the conference.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks,
Great job, everyone. Really nice.
Bye. Thanks.
Well done, everybody.